In this video, I'm going to show you 3 positions that if you start working out at home will drastically improve your forehand. The problem is this: when we go out and play, we have a limited amount of time, generally in the week or month on the court, which means we get limited amount of reps, which means our improvement is slower. If we could practice at home, like I'm going to show you, you can get more reps equaling faster improvement. So let's get started. I'm going to show you these 3 positions so you understand it, and I'm going to show you how to make sure you can start practicing these positions so you can have a forehand just like theirs. So the very first thing I want you to understand whenever we think about a stroke is that we want to think about the kinetic chain, aka basically how we use ground force and we push that ground force through our bodies and then to the racket. And that generally means through our legs and then our hips, our shoulders, our arm, and then our racket. So when we look at Thiem, his very first thing he's got to do, and any player's got to do when they have time to hit a solid forehand, is they have to load some weight so they have some weight to use. And you're gonna see that right here. Thiem's moving over, and right here, you're gonna see as he steps, he's loading his leg and his hip. And this is important because if we want to use energy, we have to store it first. And we store it by pushing against the ground and storing that weight in our hip. You're going to see the same thing with Felix here as he moves around, right, boom, there. Here's touchdown, where he's storing weight in this back leg. Both players are storing weight in this back leg, which now they're going to use. Now, here's the key about storing. It's not just about pushing down, because if they simply just, let's say, push down, they're storing their weight or pushing against the ground down, which means they're going to push up. We don't want that. They don't want that. What they're doing is storing their weight in a way that they're storing it slightly back so they can push forward. Same thing here, back so they can push forward, and you'll see that in a second. The second thing I want you to understand when they're loading, they're not just loading their weight, they're also coiling their body and preparing for the second phase we're going to talk about. If you notice here, if I separate the top half from the bottom half, both players have where their hips are facing here, and you'll see that their shoulders are facing back. This separation creates a coil that they're going to combine with the next portion, which is what I call the hip push. And so from here, they're going to load that weight, and I want you to start paying attention to what their hip does here. Their hip, because they have that weight loaded in their back leg, they're going to push and push their hip to rotate. And since their hip's rotating, their entire upper body is going to rotate. So you will not only see his hip rotate, but you're going to see his shoulders rotate too. So you can see them working it together, where the hip is now pushing the shoulder into contact. Same thing here. And you can see this by, if you watch the knee, as it starts changing the angle, right there, he's pushing his hip, which then sends his shoulders. We can run that through one more time as the hip and shoulder goes through the ball. This is a huge component to creating racketed speed and having a solid forehand, where a lot of recreational players make the mistake of just using their arm. We don't want to do this. This is so important to make sure your hips are pushing your shoulders. Now, the next stage of this is noticing how as they push their hips and their shoulders, you're going to notice that their hips and shoulders aren't running in tandem, meaning they're not moving together. They're moving together, and then the shoulder continues. It's transferring that energy through to the shoulder and allowing that shoulder to almost make a line, driving the racket through the ball. And you can see this through Thiem. You can see if we watch his hip here and you watch his shoulders, as I run through frame by frame, you get to this point where right around here, where the hip doesn't move anymore. But if you watch the shoulder right here, you'll see how now the shoulder's still driving out a little bit longer. Now, there's one crucial thing to understand, and you'll see that especially right here. There's a difference between both these players, and one to point this out, where Thiem has more of a bent arm right here. And what this means is, in general, when players have bent arms, the shoulder and the hip will probably move a little bit closer than it would if you had a straight arm. So now, if you watch the same thing, watch the hips. We're rotating here, boom, and right around here, the hip stops. Now watch the separation with the shoulder. The shoulder slinging the racket forward, and therefore you get the shoulder further ahead than this shoulder. Now, so what does this mean? It means that both players have different degrees of how much their shoulder continues to move through the ball. Does it make it better or worse? Because let's say Felix has his racket further away from his arm or his body, that it's a longer lever and it can travel faster, but we all know Thiem has a great forehand. So don't let this be something where you're like, well, I can't do this because I have a bent arm, or I can't do this because I don't have a straight arm. regardless of bent or straight, you still see them both using the same general technique. And this is why I wanted to point this out. And now that you understand this, I want to go and do some drills that you can do at home so you can start working on this and start having your forehand as solid as theirs. So here we are in my office, and I want to just make sure you understand that you don't need any crazy equipment to do all these drills. The only equipment I really have here is I'm going to use a stretchy band. This is one you could use. I have one with a handle set up on the floor, and I'm going to use some type of weight. I have like some dumbbells set up. You can use a medicine ball, small medicine ball. You don't need it to be heavy. You can use a milk jug. So I don't want any of this to be limitations. Now, the very first thing we want to work on is the load. And it's really important that we understand the load. And so to really quickly review that load is that when we push back, I'm pushing back so I can push forward. Now, this is really important because sometimes players load and they just load down. And so this is great if I want to go up, but I don't want to push my weight up. I want to push it forward. So it's really important that I load back so I can then push it forward. So this is the very first drill I want you to start practicing. And you can use your racket if you want to. Just starting your racket, and all I want you to do is load back, making sure that if I push or kind of push with my weight goes forward. And just like you saw with Felix's forehand, he moved forward and then he could still push forward. And so it doesn't matter as long as we're loading this back hip. That's the key to the whole thing. Now with this, we're gonna add on one more thing, is that when we load, we wanna create that separation. What I mean is my hips are facing this way and my shoulders are facing this way. So now, if we practice, we're going load, we have the separation, and I can just push forward. You can see how my weight can go forward. One more, load, separation, and push forward. This is the first stage of how you wanna do this drill. Now, one more thing you can do with this drill is now make it a little bit of a workout. So you start getting stronger at the same point. I'll do the exact same thing, load and push. And now I feel it in my hip, load, and push in my legs. And this is a great drill where you can do a couple sets every day to make sure you start getting stronger. And the stronger your legs become, the better and bigger your forehand's gonna become, because this is the main component to swinging it. You're gonna see why in a second. The second part is the hip rotation. Now that we've loaded here, the problem is where most players, even if they load and they're trying to get the racket to contact, they can move like that, but that's now using small muscles. What we wanna do is take my hip and rotate it. By rotating it, it's gonna pull the racket forward. And so this is where we have this combination of loading and creating that separation so I can rotate my hip to get my racket to contact. And so to do this, we're gonna use the band here. And what you wanna do is just get it tight enough where now that I'm in that loaded position, I wanna hold my hand out just like this. And there's some tension. I'll create a little bit more tension. There's some tension here. And I wanna make sure that my hand's basically gonna stay here. Now this is the same position that you would be on when you take the racket back here. I'm gonna get here, and all I'm gonna do is keep my hand here. With that loaded leg, you're gonna push out of it and rotate. So we have two things going on. We're rotating my hips. You can see this is my belly button right here. My hips, they're rotating, but we also have that loaded leg, so we're gonna push and rotate. Push and rotate. Get used to this feeling of pushing and rotating. One of the biggest mistakes so many players make is they get to this position, they start pushing a little bit, and then their arm takes over, compared to continue to push and rotate. And that's the second drill you wanna do. Now finally, we're gonna talk about the last section, which is the shoulders. When you see players like Team and Felix getting here, you can see how this shoulder, my back shoulder, my right shoulder, my dominant hand is behind my body. And then as they rotate, it starts trading. What I mean by trading is they're even now, meaning that the shoulders in back starts to trade and be in front, and the shoulder that's in front starts to trade and go behind. And so what we want to do is start focusing on when I'm rotating, allowing my shoulder to continue to rotate a little bit more. You notice if I just stop my hips here, that's fine. But what we want to do is create that separation where my hips go and I pass it along to my shoulder. We have that couple frames where that shoulder gets to push and drive that racket through the ball. And so what I want you to start focusing on is take your racket here and just focus on, as I rotate, boom, notice how the butt of the racket is facing this way. And so the butt of the racket is facing back now. I'm gonna rotate here to have the butt of the racket facing forward, compared to just rotating and a sideways here. There's nothing wrong if you just stop here. Maybe you don't have the range of flexibility in your shoulder, and that's totally fine. But if you want to get the extra bit out of your forehand, start focusing on, as you rotate, you're gonna drive that shoulder forward a little bit more. Just like if I was punching, I could punch like this, but the moment I start driving that shoulder forward, it's gonna extend through the contact, and that's what we wanna do. Now, if we put it all together, loading, rotating the hips and driving the shoulder. Loading, rotating the hips and driving it forward. Now, obviously, at the end, then we come around. These drills you can start doing at home and getting more reps. And the more reps you get, the better you get, because here's the key. Above everybody's head, what I see is a time clock. And the time clock is how much time have you spent getting great reps, because that's what separates one player from another player. Yes, there might be a little bit of they're faster or this or that, but generally it's the amount of time you spent getting great reps. Better players have more time getting great reps. And if you can start practicing this at home, you can start leapfrogging and catching up and going past players, because they're practicing once a week and you're practicing 5 days a week, with 4 of those days at home and 1 of those days on the court. And they're like, how's he getting better? He's only on the court 1 time, but you're still getting the reps. And this is why this video is so important. And if you like this video, you want to see one video just like this on the one-handed backhand, go watch this video.